This is Bernhard Ruchti, and this is the third part of my introduction to my recording of the great Fantasy and Fugue on Ad nos ad salutarem undam for organ by Franz Liszt. And in this segment I'm going to be talking about the actual interpretation, about tempo of that piece. If we overlook the composition, I would like to say something first about the actual composition itself, because this is just something amazing and wonderful. As I've said, Liszt takes that theme given by Meyerbeer and uses it as the theme for his composition, and the amazing thing is that he fills 45 minutes only with that theme. There are no side themes whatsoever. There are, like, besides some intersectionary bars, no passages whatsoever that would not be in some way related to the main theme. So it's a composition idea that is just wonderful, and it's absolutely on the same level as Liszt's piano sonata, the symphonic poems, and other works of that time. So a really extraordinary piece of music. The extraordinary situation we have here is that we know how long this piece actually lasted, and we know that about its famous performance on occasion of the dedication of the new organ at Merseburg Cathedral in September 1855. More than one source tells us that this performance, that was in full accordance with Liszt's own ideas about his piece, lasted 45 minutes. So this essential information is like a point of reference for us, and it gives us direct guidance and framework for our interpretation today. And in that way of playing, in that interpretation, we want to dive in and explore it today. I'm going to start with the very beginning of the piece, like what tempo should we use for that beginning. It's a common time bar, and the movement name says moderato. We don't have any metronome markings for that piece given by Franz Liszt, but we have an interesting information in the theme of the work as it is in its original form in the opera The Prophet by Meyerbeer. If you look at the score, we find a metronome marking for that piece, for that theme that Liszt used for his organ composition. Now let's have a closer look at this. So this is Meyerbeer's original version of the theme. It's a 6/4 bar. We see that Liszt transforms the rhythmical structure of that theme into a 4/4 bar. So instead of a triple structure, we have a regular structure with dotted quarter notes and 8 notes. So the metronome marking given by Meyerbeer says quarter note equals 100. So if we calculate what this part would be, it would be dotted half note equals 33. So that's the actual tempo. Now this structure becomes this in Liszt's version. So here it would not be the dotted half note anymore, but the regular half note, that is 33. And as a result, we would have a tempo of quarter note is 66. Now, the original theme by Meyerbeer is like this. and Liszt's version of the theme in the same tempo is like this. An important fact to be aware of is that if Liszt doesn't say anything about changing the tempo, then he had no change of tempo in mind. So the quarter note that equals 66 actually remains for quite a long time at the beginning. The first change of tempo is indicated in bar number 74, where he says animando poco a poco. So at the beginning of 74, that means we still have the same tempo basically as we had at the beginning, and now he slowly starts speeding it up to the allegro that shows in 96. And generally speaking, as I've said before, it's important to see that it's still the quarter note that is our point of reference. So the quarter note is the actual pulse that we feel also in that allegro passage. A next indication is in bar number 132, where he writes tempo giusto. Now that's some sort of weird thing to find in a score of the middle of the 19th century, because this is kind of an old-fashioned or even archaic term used in the 17th and 18th century. Back then it describes the middle tempo which is related to the human pulse. And from that, it goes up to the field of allegros, for instance, or down to a largo or adagio. But here, Liszt uses that term within a passage of speeding up. So what does he mean by that? Usually, it's neglected. It's just another step within that part of speeding up, but if you look into that more closely, you will discover something very interesting, and we can do that and actually find the answer to that mysterious term in the autograph by Liszt. So this is Liszt's original autograph, a copy of course. This would be bar 130, and this would be the point where the tempo giusto begins. So we see that those two bars are the same as in the printed version, but here he notes note values that are double the note values of the printed version. So we have full notes instead of half notes. We also see that he cancels this passage, and on the next page he writes it that way, like with half notes instead of full notes, and he writes tempo giusto above it. So if you look at that more closely, that's the two versions, the autograph version and first edition of bar 132. That's here. We see the original version in full notes and eighth notes in the pedal, and the printed version in half notes and 16th notes in the pedal. The music is absolutely the same. So obviously what this means, that this eighth note is the same as the 16th note back here. So it seems that Liszt decided to change that not for musical reasons, but because he wanted to achieve a better readability for the music, because this is much more convenient than this actually is. And to do that, he changed it, he halved the note values, and he used that term tempo giusto to express that we have to go back one level regarding tempo. So in fact, this means that the quarter note of this passage becomes the 8th note of this. The tempo at this point is half the tempo that it was before. So he starts again in order to speed up even more later on. And this is a very important thing to be considered when it comes to the fantasy in general and to that first big part in particular. All right, so after that tempo giusto passage, the speeding up process continues. It says vivace and goes on, and then the first part of that piece is ended. Now, in bar 243, the adagio starts. And as I've said before, it's important, since the quarter note is and remains the reference unit of time throughout the whole piece, that the quarter note at this point is slower than the quarter note at the beginning of the piece. What sounds natural isn't that natural, but it's an essential part to achieve our goal of 45 minutes for the whole piece. So as a result, this adagio becomes a huge and profound meditation. It becomes really very slow, and it's also important to be aware of the same thing that was the case in the first part. If Liszt doesn't write anything about changing the tempo, then he had no change in tempo in mind. That means this remains an adagio for a very long time. The tempo doesn't change until bar 357, where it says un poco più moto. In many interpretations nowadays, you can hear that people start with an adagio, but already a few bars later they are up to an andante or something. But that is not what the music tells us. So, it's actually the place to do something you can only do on an organ, because the tone, the sound will last as long as you like when you press the keys. So this is really the place to perform magic in that piece and to show off all the beautiful sounds an organ offers. And in my recording, it's extraordinary sounds that the Ladegast organ in Merseburg offers. This brings me to something else. Liszt emphasizes, when he talks about music, when he teaches, that the way of playing should be, as he says, periodic. That means periods or phrases were enormously important to him. It seems that this is what he was talking about all the time, meaning, particularly in a slow context, we have to be able to start a phrase, to build it up until it reaches some sort of climax, and to end it afterwards. That is done with rubato. It's not easy to do, it's an art to do so, but it's actually the only way to play such an adagio and still show the big phrases, still show the big connections, the overall connections throughout that piece. All right. After this, we have a short intersection, and then the fugue starts. And it's interesting to see that this is a part where the articulations are very precise. We find accents, we find like staccato information, and we find 30-second notes, sometimes even more than that. So it's a very sophisticated rhythm that Liszt develops here. And it's important that if we look at the music and see, for instance, parts like that with 3 triple 30-second notes, or those grace notes, that they need to be within the same clear, distinct and rhythmic character of the piece. So they mustn't be mushy or indistinct or something like that, but they must remain a tool to achieve a very rhythmic character of the piece overall. The fugue goes on, then I will share a little secret. Well, it's not a secret, but you will hear that when you hear the recording. But I will just tell you what I do. I've said that the original print of that piece is a print that shows both an organ version and a version for piano 4 hands. And some passages are actually different. So for the piano versions, he added some like quick notes, fast notes, just to achieve more sound. You know, while the organ can just produce sound as long-lasting as it wants, the piano is clearly limited, and to come up with a lot of energy in a forte connotation, you need just some more speed going on. And since many of the press reviews talk particularly about Alexander Winterberger's virtuosity with his feet, it's likely to presume that he might have included some parts, some aspects of the piano version into his organ version. And that's what I do, starting at bar 592, because I play those 16th notes that are in the left hand in the piano version with the pedal. And the effect is wonderful in my eyes, particularly in that tempo, which is slower than it's played usually. That's just some little detail. After that, the vivace molto starts, and here it's just also as a general thing that we see we have those 16th notes that stimulate the whole thing, that add a lot of energy to the musical structure, and we have still the original theme from the beginning that of course still has a moderato character. So it's like something that is contradictory that comes together in that passage, and if we bring out and point out that contradictory structure, we will create a lot of energy at this point towards the end of the piece. So we see that if we combine the information Liszt gives us in the print edition of this piece with what we know about its performance, and first of all what we know about its duration, we come up with rather precise information what to do. What to do about that piece as a player. The piece itself becomes some sort of teacher for us today to explore an aesthetic, a way of performance, a performance practice that was common at that time and that matches with Franz Liszt's intention. And as I've said before, the result we get is something that teaches us not only something about that piece or organ music in general, but about music in general, be it orchestral music, piano music, or whatever. So it's really an extraordinary situation that this piece is there and that it's now recorded in that version, because it can teach us a lot about performance practice. All right, so that's what I wanted to share with you regarding tempo and interpretation. In a next segment, I'm going to talk about the actual organ and the recording situation. Please subscribe to my channel, don't forget to like and ring the bell to get notified when there's any news.